expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio. I'm your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and my lovely co-host is joining us today, Leah Shaper.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. We have an interesting show for you today. We're going to be talking about a topic that's been rehashed in the media, Gunong Padang. And is it really 27,000 years old, as they claim? We're going to break it down in the first half for you. And the second half, we're going to discuss the Mayan culture and its influence on North American archaeology. I've got some interesting slides pulled up, and we'll dive down a rabbit hole there with the hero twins mythology from the Mayan culture. Somehow it got its way up into Oklahoma, and we'll talk about that in the second half. Are you
Very
excited?
I am.
All right, let's buckle up. First, I'd like to share with you something very interesting that occurred today. I don't know if you're aware about it. Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can.
There's a very large earthquake that happened a few hours ago in the Philippines. And earlier in the week, I said that this large coronal hole that was facing Earth on the sun could very well produce a large earthquake, because historically, most of the 8 magnitude earthquakes on Earth have occurred when these large coronal holes face Earth.
Mm-hmm. And that was an 8?
No, and it was a 7.6. And the bad news is that this is the position of the hole. The coronal hole stream hasn't reached us yet. It should arrive on the 4th, which is Monday.
So we should probably be ready for other large earthquakes.
Well, we could see another large earthquake from this coronal hole. And we're not just making this up, a paper that came out in 2021, the sun as a significant agent provoking earthquakes. Usually these papers talk about solar storms or coronal mass ejections as the trigger. But in this paper, it talks about the relation of coronal holes and their high-speed streams with seismicity. So there you go. We'll leave the links below. Anything else to discuss on that topic?
No.
Yeah, so buckle up, Buttercup. In the next 2 days, we could see a larger earthquake, 8 magnitude. So that brings us to the main story here. A 27,000-year-old pyramid? ? Controversy hits an extraordinary archaeological claim. Now, here we are, new evidence, according to the scientists that documented it, suggests that Indonesia's Gunung Padang is the oldest known pyramid. They're suggesting it could be as old as 27,000 years old. And all of this information was exposed with a Netflix series with Graham Hancock as the lead. And the bad news was that at the time, 34 scientists had signed on to a petition to say that this was garbage because he did not provide a scientific paper or his evidence. And so, sure enough, guess what happened? In October, he provided the paper.
And by he, we mean Danny Hellman. I always forget how to pronounce his last name. Netawad. I can't pronounce
Wijaya. Wijaya is a very common name in Indonesia. It's Nato Wijaya.
Nato Wijaya. Thank you.
He's Nato Wijaya.
Well, and sadly, I'm sorry to say, but I think that the evidence presented in this paper is very thin.
It's beyond thin, and we'll break it down in a second. Here's some of the thin evidence. But here's a great blog post. It'll take just a couple minutes to read, and I believe it gives a wonderful gist of what we're about to go into great detail of. Because what I have is a bulletproof.
This morning. This is great.
You read this morning?
Yeah.
Okay. In fall of 2022, an episode of Graham Hancock's Netflix series, Ancient Apocalypse, heavily featured the impressive archaeological site of Gunung Padang in Indonesia. Gunung Padang is a hilltop site with several terraces and visually striking arrangements of the amazingly naturally occurring columnar igneous rocks that geology has blessed us with in many places on Earth, especially here in Gunung Padang. Now, based on the work of Indonesian researcher Danny Hillman Natawijaya, Hancock claimed the site was in fact a natural volcanic hill, which it is, but a pyramid built by an ancient lost civilization, perhaps as much as 25,000 years ago. Other archaeologists who work in the region, including Indonesian archaeologists, consider the terraces at Gunung Padang to be 2,000 years old. Now, as reported in many news and SciComm outlets, Natawijaya et al. 2023, the paper we're going to discuss, published a follow-up article in the Journal of Archaeological Prospection, claiming to demonstrate that Gunung Padang is indeed the oldest pyramid in the world, as much as 20,000 years older than the pyramids of Egypt. Now, the problem is there is a massive disconnect between the claims made, especially in the conclusion of the paper, and the evidence presented in the body. The title of the article and the resulting media headlines do not match the evidence, as is often the case in these salacious type of scientific claims.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're going to do is we're going to break down the paper and some of the nonsense here. Where is the paper? There it is. Geoarchaeological prospecting of Gunung Padang, buried prehistoric pyramid in West Java, Indonesia. Now, did you get through this whole thing?
I read most of it. I skipped over some of the sections that got into great detail about some of the techniques being used to essentially look underground. There's an awful lot of this paper that is devoted to discussion of that, which is important. Interestingly, I watched a video this morning that was critical of this paper for many reasons, but one of them was that, like, the diagrams, the vast majority of the diagrams in this paper don't really provide any good information. Even the pictures chosen are like, okay, yes, there's a caption, yes, there's sort of an explanation of what I'm looking at, but it's like none of it's really clear. And this person who made this other video critical of this paper was suggesting that it may be that in part this paper was written in a way to obfuscate the lack of evidence, which I actually kind of agree with.
Yes, and I do too. So first of all, the number one problem with this paper, and it might be because of the journal it's in, it's called Archaeological Prospection.
Which is apparently a well-regarded journal. So
yeah, but it means that you don't have a lot of evidence, that you're going to go out on a limb because you dug a hole or something and make a claim. That's what this journal is for. It's not for actual archaeological digs where you do all this intensive stuff. It's to go out on a limb because you did LiDAR or you flew over a region and you saw something.
Well, I mean, I sort of heard it put that this is, if you're doing a study that kind of is a mix of the geology and maybe a little archaeology, like this is a good place to publish for stuff like that. But I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So in the paper, if you read it, it's not for the layman. I think that they purposely use extra jargon to eliminate most people from understanding what's going on in here. But what you can glean by reading it is that it is filled with adverbs, which is not typical of a scientific paper. And the use of persuasive language throughout is not what a scientific paper is based on. Your goal here is not to persuade people on what you found. It's to show them the evidence and make a conclusion, correct?
Well, yes. And then therein lies the problem, right? Because there'll be some little bit of supposed evidence of something, and then a conclusion is drawn like this is anthropogenic, or therefore this corresponds to this date, but the evidence doesn't actually get you there conclusively.
Exactly. And then the diagrams, they're nonsensical. They use all these different letters and numbers that you can't find in the text, as if to be confusing.
Yeah, no, it got to a point in reading this where I was like, I'm not even going to try to put the diagrams together with the text because of all of the labeling. Like it was so overly complicated the way the paper is constructed. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and in all instances of all papers and scientific books and papers and journals, the figures have an explanation that's clear underneath, and it matches the text in the area of the paper where it is presented.
Right.
And this is not the case here.
Right. Right.
It's just like, look at all these cool pictures. We did it. We did the science.
But then, I mean, right. Yeah. And there are much bigger problems here, right? Like problem number one on an evidential level is the way that they did the dating. So really all they did is they dated the soil around certain layers of this structure, which doesn't tell you anything because they're dating it. It tells
you the date of the soil.
It tells you the date of the soil. That's it. It doesn't tell you that there's apparently maybe they weren't. I mean, there's only like one archaeologist listed on this publication, on this article.
Yes.
And that's another question that people have raised is like, did they actually find any archaeological evidence other than that stone that you showed earlier, which is that's questionable whether or not that's actually the result of human activity. But there's a general lack of like, evidence of human activity here, right? Like pottery, bones,
there's a lack
charcoal.
Okay, so let's clarify here. In the paper, this is their bold claim, and I can scroll down to the bottom, that there was multiple occupations here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah, which I also have a problem with. Go ahead.
I don't have the cross section pulled right up, but there were multiple occupations here, and that the base layer, the bottom layer, dates to as old between 22 and 27,000 years old.
Right, but they're not dating an object that indicates human activity at that point. They're just dating the soil around the rocks.
Furthermore, there's no evidence that there was even a construction of anything at the level of which they are dating. They show a picture of a hole with some rocks in it and claim it's something, but there's no evidence of any construction that dates to that time. Additionally, there is not a single shred, not a single lithic of anything anthropogenic from humans.
Right, right.
Very suspect.
Yeah, and then, they do a lot of, oh gosh, there's so many problems here. I don't even know where to start. I mean, you sort of touched on this, so I'll start there. They do a lot of discussion about, let's say, the orientation of the rocks that they found. But one of the things that I was wondering about, especially when I'm looking at some of their pictures, okay, you have all of these columnar basaltic type rocks, and they're maybe they're kind of like all laid out in a similar orientation. But sometimes that happens in nature naturally. I mean, it kept making me think of hiking the Appalachian Trail in Vermont. And I remember because they point out that there's a slope somewhere, like a ramp, like a built ramp that was constructed. And I was thinking of these parts on the Appalachian Trail that I'm walking on that look a lot like that, where you have rocks that are sort of all oriented in the same direction and they essentially form a ramp, but it's a natural structure. And so there's nothing in here that they wrote about in terms of the orientation of the rocks below. Maybe on the surface, that's a different thing. But there's nothing that they wrote that, to me, conclusively says, okay, humans must have done this. And there's a lack of discussion about the formation of those rocks and how they might lay and why they might lay in a certain way, all of that.
Correct.
So I have a big problem with that.
Additionally, these rocks were not transported here. They're from here.
Yeah.
This entire region is in an Oligocene caldera that dropped down a very long time ago, but it was basalt in here, and these columnar rocks are everywhere. This is just one of dozens of other types of sites just like this around Indonesia.
Right. Right.
And if this was, here's what's interesting. Let me throw this out there. Mm-hmm. There's another site that's very famous called Nan Madol, and it's also near the ocean. It's at sea level. This site is also near sea level. If this was an ice age complex, the ocean would be 400 or 500 feet lower, and this wouldn't be nowhere near sea level. but right now it is, which means it's probably built within the last 9,000 years.
Well, not only that, okay, but right in the beginning of the paper, the authors acknowledge the fact that this is a part of the world where sedimentation rates are very high. Climactic change is like pretty significant, which has a lot to do with the fact that it's near sea level, right? And at the same time, when they talk about the dating and the different layers, right? They say, okay, there's a layer that was constructed sometime between 14,000 BCE and 25,000 BCE, which is a huge stretch. It's 11,000 years, right? And then there's a 6,000 year plus hiatus of nothing happening.
Yes.
Right? And then it was buried. And basically what they're claiming is that it was buried by human beings between 7,900 and 6,100 BCE. And then they did some more construction for 1,500 years. And then there was no building for like another 7,000 years and it was buried. And it's like, you cannot eliminate the possibility that a natural process buried whatever they think they're looking at. And based on high sedimentation rates and the climate of this area, that's not out of the realm of the possibility, right? It could have been a landslide, a flood, something like that. But also, why do they think that there's some kind of continuity here, right? Like that there's people building a thing and then it's buried and then this long period of time, like a couple thousand years goes by and people are like, yeah, we should build here again because there was something here before. Well, how would they even have known unless they themselves dug down many feet? Like, it just doesn't really it doesn't add up to me.
Well, it could, to be honest, look like it does now in this state of disarray, and you come upon it and you're like, hey, let's straighten up the rocks.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, but the suggestion here is that that's not the case, right? That there was some arrangement of rocks that got completely buried, and then somebody came along and said, hey, let's build a thing here. I don't know. It's very weird. I don't understand well, I don't think that it's that I don't understand. It's just that it's just not compelling in any way, shape, or form. There's nothing about the evidence in here that indicates anything in particular to me.
Yeah. So the problem with the evidence is that there isn't any evidence of anthropogenic material beyond 5,200 BCE. There is really good archaeology to show that this has a beginning occupation at 5,200 BCE. That's when the first people came around here and left stuff around.
Yeah.
This is the only thing they claim as anthropogenic from the earlier period. And there's no evidence that it was tooled.
Right.
There's no evidence that it was shaped. It is, in fact, just a rock, a very unique rock.
Right. So basically, we're now missing like a span of 20,000 years. We're missing anthropogenic evidence for a 20,000 period stretch.
Yeah.
Like, what is the likelihood of that? And again, I don't really know how much actual archaeological work. I mean, other people have suggested that the way that they did this study and the digging that they did was potentially destructive to the site and wasn't done correctly if you're actually looking for archaeological evidence. But
well, the geology was very poor. They did poor sampling. Their core samples were poorly done, and they were polluted with other sediment as they were making them. So this wasn't a very good scientific endeavor. It was more like a manufactured endeavor to claim something that is not true. And the reason being is that the lead author is suspect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Danny Hillman, Nato Wijaya, is a proponent for Atlantis in Indonesia.
Right, which is not supported by, let's say, Plato's writings whatsoever, right? Like his description about where it is nowhere near Indonesia. I mean,
so that is a big problem.
I spent some time this morning looking at other videos about this and then reading the commentary from viewers, and it's really interesting, right? Because there are a bunch of people who are like actually pretty defensive about the idea of this being a very old 27,000 year old structure. but their basis for that is like solely because was sort of condoned by Graham Hancock. And it's like, well, that's not a reason to think that this is correct. Like, I like Graham Hancock very much.
Oh, they think it's correct. They don't. Oh, they support it.
There are a good handful of people who are, yes, defensive about the idea itself.
There is no evidence that it's older than it is old. 5200 BCE is old.
Right.
That's 7,200 years old. That's pretty old.
Also, I mean, it's like everybody who is critical of the criticizers of this theory is like, well, you know, you're crazy if you think that ancient civilizations didn't exist. And it's like, you can believe that ancient civilizations existed and still be critical of something like this when the evidence is lacking. It's like, it doesn't mean that every single thing that you stumble across that somebody proposes is that old is actually that old, you know? And then there's the other thing that someone else brought up, which is like, the Indonesian government has heavily funded study of this site, like this study in particular.
Yeah.
And the suggestion is that the Indonesian government sort of sees this as an opportunity for tourism. And
bingo.
You know, right. You know, so
because here's the evidence. If you go around to other sites that are exactly the same, where they've built together these columnar basalts into very similar structures, they date, guess how old? 2,000 years max.
Right.
And some of them are even younger. Like Nan Madol, the first megalithic architecture began 1180 AD to 1200 AD. This is the same time that Chaco's being built.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this type of construction all over the world was happening at this time.
Yeah.
Because the climate was very conducive earlier to fertility, mass production, and everyone was living the good life.
Right. Oh, but I gotta mention too, this really bugged me. So the authors of this paper at one point are basically suggesting that because the stones that are lower down and supposedly older are like really weathered, that somehow is an indication of like when this was built. And it's like, no, all it means is that they were exposed long ago for a long period of time, and then they weren't, right? And again, it doesn't point to anthropogenic construction.
Yeah. And
Really
so
bizarre.
this is really interesting because it's also very similar to the pyramids of Guimar, which are rectangular shaped pyramids all around Tenerife in the Canary Islands, assumed to be built by the Guanches, a group of people that lived there before the Spanish murdered them all. But Thor Heyerdahl put out the idea that this was some ancient complex and a connection between Egypt and the Mesoamerica, like the Mayan pyramids and the Aztec pyramids, these step pyramids. But it turns out that they were dated to the 19th century, yet still hundreds of videos on YouTube about how this is a cover-up and blah, blah, blah. But what a recent archaeological study found underneath of one of these structures, a cave, which had archaeology dating just 2,000 years old from the Guanches.
Right.
So that's the oldest they can be. In fact, they're much younger.
That reminds me another thing that proponents of the 27,000-year-old Gunong Padang theory say is they're like, well, what about the voids that they found underneath? And it's like, it doesn't mean that they're human made. That happens naturally sometimes. It doesn't mean anything.
Additionally, Nan Madol, Gunong Padang, and here, these pyramids are all poorly constructed. They're not like any megalithic structures we know of. They literally look like piles of rubble, which they are. So they weren't built by any advanced megalithic civilization because there is no mortarless joints like in Sacsayhuaman or any of the other megalithic sites worldwide.
One more thing that reminded me again, they cite in this paper the existence of mortar between some of the rocks below, but then at least not in this paper, they don't analyze that mortar at all. So who knows what it is?
We'll be right back with more Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio. Stay tuned.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine.
There was blood on the wire.
Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance. People under fire. Children at the cannons. There are...
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
The Secret Kindergarten is here for the young children of the world. The best program on the radio for kids, dealing with the most important topics in the whole universe. Fairy tales, music and movement, numbers, plants, animals, fun, colors, insects. Take care and cast your ears out to catch a story from the world of other young things. Reach out, up, under, and over. Sing a song. Talk about feelings. Just remember the magic word. The magic word is no. Step on into the Secret Kindergarten. Saturdays, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Revolution Radio.
Interrupt your normally scheduled programming to bring you this important broadcasting announcement.
Now is the time to explore your greatest potential, embracing truth, health, and wellness while discarding the system and exposing its corruption. Experience true freedom every Saturday night between 6 and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live from Studio B. It's the Jonathan Wright Show.
Find it right here at revolution.radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
We're back with the second half of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio. I'm your host, Diamond, my lovely co-host, Leah Shaper. We're discussing Gunong Padang and the new paper coming out that shows zero evidence that the older layer was built by humans or there were even humans there, unfortunately. Sorry to burst your bubble.
I couldn't even believe it when I looked at what they're using for carbon dating and then saw that it was all soil. I couldn't believe that. Like, what journal?
They didn't even find charcoal.
Journal
like
publishes
people
that?
need a hearth, a fire to cook. They didn't find anything.
Right. Like, yeah. It's very
all right.
strange.
Sorry to burst your bubble, but
yeah,
I think we did it justice. We could have spent a whole hour picking it apart, but
easily.
There's no need.
No.
That brings us over to the picture I was showing during the break here. This is a plate, a ceremonial plate. Obviously, it can't hold food. It's got holes in it. That was dug up in a Spiro mound. And
you think that's a raccoon in the middle there?
That's a raccoon. Yeah, of course. And look, it is the typical north, south, east, west plus. That is exactly the same as the geoglyphs we discovered in Indonesia. I mean, in Idaho.
It's a totally different place.
So I'm wondering if one of these is a raccoon, like the one on the top here.
I mean, this is not the first place. It's not the first place in the world that you see sort of crosses like that.
No, but the native culture, especially the mound builders and all over at this time, about 2,000 years ago, were using this as a very prominent symbol, the plus.
Well, and you
because
also
it represents the medicine wheel. It represents the four winds.
Cardinal directions.
The cardinal directions. Yeah, it was like
and
part of their...
You see a lot of, I forget what you call them, but they're indications of the tribe that are like a circle with a cross in it. Sometimes it's like this.
Yeah, so the Ojibwa is slightly shifted, like you showed, and looks more like an X. Yeah. And those are medicine wheels of sorts.
Yeah.
So the Spiro mounds, and here's what's interesting. Before we dive into some of the mind-blowing things that have been found here, what it appears to be happening is around 2,500 years ago, a different culture from Mesoamerica made its way up into North America. And I'm talking Florida, Oklahoma, the Southwest out here, sometime around 0 AD. And so I did some research on the Mayan culture. The Mayan culture was peaking around this time. They had too many people. So there clearly was going to be groups that are like, hey, let's go north, that are extremely abundant, well-equipped, and they're trying to spread their culture.
Well, and high points of civilizations are typically when you see it geographically expanding too.
And so the mound building phase out here, which has, I think, a pretty good Mayan influence, begins at 900. This coincides with the collapse of the Mayan Empire. So we actually see dating here. So the peak of the Mayan Empire was 250 AD. And by 900 AD, all of the Mayan cities were abandoned. Where did these people go?
Right. Right.
And so it's coinciding at the same exact time when the mound builders show up. And we've got influence. So this is a Mayan god. There's another one here. And this is the Adena pipe found in Ohio.
Yeah. The ears in particular always sort of trigger that resemblance.
Yeah, that's pretty triggering.
Because you either have these like big sort of circular earrings or you have big ear holes. Yeah, like that. It's very distinctive.
Ohio
style.
Mesoamerica. Ohio, Mesoamerica. Now, the Adena pipe, they've dated to 200 BC.
It's interesting
So
that this
this would
Adena
be at the
pipe, the
peak-
figure like lacks jewelry, like the other figures. It's not particularly adorned.
Yeah, and he has the visible intestines down here.
That's interesting.
That's very interesting. Well, yeah, so all the Mayan gods have adornments, but all this guy has is a flap.
Mm-hmm. But he's got a headdress and he's got the earrings and, here's a necklace and a belt.
Yeah, and so this hair is very indicative of the Tewa culture, which still
it does look a little
exists.
similar. Yeah.
And they used to wear these big buns.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of interesting. Now, what's interesting about Spiro Mounds is when they excavated it, they found material from all over the United States, as far as the tip of South Florida, in the case of shells and stuff coming from like near Canada and out in the far west.
Mm-hmm.
And here's an engraving with a dancer with bows. But again, there's going to be another person on this side and two hands. The reason I'm bringing this up is because these motifs of two people facing away and towards each other also comes from the Mayan culture.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a perfect example. Some of the oldest art comes from the Toltecs, and this is Toltec art. Take a look at this guy, and what he's holding in his hand, or whatever one of them is holding in his hand, is the same exact thing as these people are holding in their hand.
Mm-hmm.
This comes from a mound 900 AD in Oklahoma, and this comes from 3,000 years ago, the Toltec culture.
Those ear circles are present again in both too. They're
right
less
here.
prominent in the Idaho artifact, but
he's got,
they're
maybe
here.
that's the helmet that they're wearing.
Yeah.
That's in the Idaho artifact.
Yeah. The other thing
There
that's
is-
striking me, go back to the Idaho artifact for a second.
This is Ohio.
Oh, Ohio. No, the other, the disc, disc with the twins.
That's Oklahoma.
That's Oklahoma. The center, that central symbol there, it, in a way, it resembles a swastika, like it has an orientation. And something else you showed a little while ago had that as well, and it was surrounded by disembodied hands. Very interesting.
Yeah, that's the four winds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what most medicine wheels look like.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Toltec. This is in Idaho. We're all over the map here.
Mm-hmm.
This is Ohio.
Fascinating.
And this is Mesoamerica.
Yeah.
There's a definite connection there.
Yeah.
And then that brings us to the Mayan hero twins. Now, some of this depiction, this looks Asian to me, that guy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when Ransom was down here, he had a chance to go to the Toltec Museum, and he took hundreds of pictures of these stone masks that were hand carved thousands of years ago that are absolutely mind-blowing. And I can't wait. We're going to do a podcast on it with him. But the hero twins is a motif in Aztec and Mayan culture. And it's even written about in the Popol Vuh. Do you know what that document is?
I do not.
It's like the Bible of Mesoamerica. It's one of the few scripts that they have that actually the Spanish didn't burn.
That last image also looks very Asian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, many people claim that America was named after Amerigo Vespucci. Didn't you learn that in grade school?
I sure did.
A map maker.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other people that are well aware of Amaru. And Amaru Ka would be the land of Amaru. And Amaru is, the base mythology goes back to the Andean civilization in South America. And this is where the feathered serpent comes from initially, or the first dragon in Mesoamerica. In Incan mythology, Amaru is a huge double-headed serpent that dwells underground at the bottom of lakes and rivers. Illustrated with the heads of a bird and a puma, Amara can be seen emerging from a central element in the center of a step mountain or pyramid motif in the Gateway of the Sun at Tiwanaku in Bolivia. So that's kind of interesting that this mythology of a dragon is coming from a culture that might have witnessed it in the night sky. That's all I'm getting to there.
Mm-hmm.
And then this same mythology, the one of Amaru that's Incan, may also be the same mythology of Quetzalcoatl up in Mexico there.
Mm-hmm.
They saw the same thing. They just have a different description of the of the feathered serpent. They have a feathered serpent. Down here, they got a puma-headed bird serpent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting that all of these myths line up, and the fact that if it is the land of Amaru, because all the native cultures believed in the feathered serpent, then America would be the perfect name for it. Or
I
Amaruca.
actually really don't think there's an etymological link there. I really don't think those are the same roots.
Yeah,
but
no one does.
Yeah, I mean, I it's partially a sound thing. It partially has to do with the way it's spelled, and it's partially just that I have really good instincts for etymology. So.
So it's very interesting, and I think this has to do everything with the electric universe and electric comets and something and or witnessed in the night sky in a very distant past. The sacred serpent was a serpent or dragon deity, often represented as giant winged serpent with crystalline eyes, a reddish snout, and a llama head. Depending on the variations of Amaru, whether in the various animal features, names, or tonality of its skin, Amaru is always present. Its symbolism is very broad: water, storms, hail, wisdom, rainbow, Milky Way.
That is awfully broad.
Yeah.
But interesting, too, that it's kind of like a chimeric figure.
Yeah. And then also it's associated with a mythical being that is also related to the underworld, the earth and earthquakes, according to the myths. Amarus have protective or destructive behavior. Amaru Aranwe is a myth about two powerful Amarus fighting against each other, causing destruction and death as the fight still goes on. And then we come to Go
ahead.
Then we come to Viracocha, the god of lightning. It's interesting that Viracocha is coming to fight Amaru.
The whole thing smells of like just natural catastrophism, right? It's as if this is the energy, the figure that represents that happens on a periodic basis. And so therefore it's something we need to acknowledge and maybe even revere for its just natural power. Thus you get this sort of godlike figure.
So they're on Earth fighting. And then the two Amarus tried to fight the gods, but they tried to escape and they flew into the skies. But Waira drugged them back to the earth with the power of the wind. And Yapa fought and put the final blow to them. When the two Amarus died, they turned into the chain of mountains. So this could be explaining huge catastrophic events on Earth that were witnessed and are now explained as a fight between the gods.
Maybe even mountain building.
Yeah. But that is some amazing mythology. And this is the big question. Okay. So let's talk big picture. These pyramids and this culture that reached this high point in North and South America reached it around 3,000 years ago in both places. Some of it lingered in North America till about 1,000 years ago. And then it all disappeared in the last 500 years. If this has something to do with the megalithic culture that was wiped out during the Ice Age, this is the big question, and I think needs to be tackled next by all the people that are talking about this. What goes on from 11,500 years ago, the end of the Younger Dryas, till 3,000 or 4,000 years ago when they start building pyramids?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
We've got this 7,000 year hiatus. And if the Atlanteans showed up in North America, did they show up 7,000 years after the catastrophe?
Right. Right. Yeah. There's like a big blank spot in history, it seems, in an archaeological perspective, which is interesting.
But there isn't. That's what I want to get at. There was a city called Jericho on the West Bank.
Mhm.
It dates to 15,000 years ago, and it's still occupied today. It's been
Right.
continuously occupied for 15,000 years.
Right.
It's located in Anatolia, where we've got this advanced culture building thousands of Göbekli Tepes 11,500 years ago.
Right.
So there is an advanced culture. We know where they were in the Fertile Crescent. It's where all of our religions come from.
Mhm.
So what's going on?
I mean, it may just be, some places were climactically more advantageous than others, right? So maybe the continuity of advanced culture is only happening in certain places and then it dies out in others because the conditions are not conducive to it.
Yeah. So what we know about what's going on in Africa and the Fertile Crescent from the end of the Younger Dryas to about 4,000 years ago, it was the Fertile Crescent. It was amazing.
Mhm.
All of where the Sahara Desert was the largest inland lake. Lake Chad was there. There
Mhm.
were inland waterways. It was not at all as it was today.
Mhm.
And it allowed for these civilizations that might have been wiped out for the most part during the Younger Dryas catastrophe, but a few lived and they built it all back. Göbekli Tepe is testament to what they were doing. We don't know what it means.
Mhm.
But because they were in the right place at the right time, the climate there was so conducive to farming. That's why we get farming exploding over the Fertile Crescent right after the catastrophe, all the way up to, we have evidence of farming all the way up to 12,000 years ago here.
Yeah.
It might have, the earlier evidence might be wiped out.
Sure.
But shortly thereafter, because it spread so rapidly in Anatolia, it moved into Europe. Within 9,000 years ago, they were farming in Europe with the same techniques.
Mhm.
So this is like the bastion, the stronghold of those who survived after the catastrophe that were already pretty advanced.
Isn't it funny how, because of that activity in that time frame, that therefore is what we assume was the state of all human civilization at that time? Like that was the moment, right, where we grow from being hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists to building cities, all of that stuff. We just assume that it all happened there and only there because that's all we found, right? And then later we find all this other stuff, and it turns out actually there were advanced civilizations elsewhere at different times. So it's just like, it's such a dumb assumption.
Yeah, like we have no idea what was going on in Mesoamerica, though the megalithic builders, the true megalithic sites.
Yeah.
Not the ones that the Incas found and built upon,
Right.
but those that they found.
Right.
Those
With
are the
stuff
true.
before it.
We don't have any idea who those people were.
Right.
That's the big question.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the evidence doesn't really show that if there was a megalithic culture at the peak of the Ice Age, 18,000, 20,000 years ago, that may have been destroyed during the Younger Dryas catastrophe, and or because remember, starting 14,000 years ago, guess what happens? Sea level starts coming up geologically rapidly. It rises 100 feet in 1,000 years. And if you're by the shore, I don't think you're saving your city.
Right.
So we may have lots of things hidden a few hundred feet underwater that is like the most difficult area to survey that we don't know about.
And we already know about some of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like you've got whole cities off the coast of India that are buried. And apparently there's a lot of resistance towards exploring those, not just because of the technical difficulties, but of doing so, but because of, like, apparently the Indian government is very reluctant to give permission to explore that.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre. Like, why would you not want to explore that? That's very strange. Now, I'm not going to assume from that it's like some giant conspiracy. I mean, it could be, but that is odd.
Yeah. Now, the one thing based on the archaeology that I know now, and because of the discussion of the Younger Dryas event. When you look at the archaeology in the Fertile Crescent in Anatolia, and you can see some of the earlier sites, they're extremely primitive.
Yeah.
Extremely. And it can't be just in 500 years they become these advanced artisans with advanced archaeoastronomy, as shown in the Göbekli Tepe complexes.
Mm-hmm.
And so what if after a catastrophe, the megalithic civilization is so wiped out, there's only a few hundred of them left?
Yeah.
And it is those, a couple of them made it to the Fertile Crescent, found this group of people and started teaching them. And that's how we get this rapid increase in these amazing structures that they were making a lot of for some reason that we don't know yet.
Right. And it could also be something like, so if you have primitive sites that are existing at the same time as like megalithic sites, it could be that you have some kind of elite culture that's doing the megalithic building, and then like the regular people doing their own thing. I mean, that's possible. And then when folks get wiped out because of natural catastrophe, there's fewer of the elites, and so we sort of lose that megalithic building ability. It could be something like that.
Well, the exact same thing happened in North America. There were thousands of tribes living up here harmoniously, and then some other group made its way up here 3,000 years ago, subjugated the tribes, convinced them that they knew the gods and they knew better. And then we've got all these pyramid mound complexes. We've got the Chacoan phenomenon with the Chaco roads. They may not have megalithic blocks, but they are megalithic constructions.
In the sense that they're very different from what other people are doing, right? Like Chaco is a good example, right? It's not a megalithic building, but it is a very fine type of masonry that obviously takes some skill that was acquired at some point along the way. And that's completely different than what the other people in the area were doing at the time. They're living in cliffs, in holes in cliffs,
Yeah, and as we discussed, probably hiding from these people that are trying to subjugate them.
Right.
And what's interesting is the Chacoan roads, a new phenomenon they've just started studying in the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
These are exactly the same as the causeways that are in the jungles of South America that they've only recently uncovered with LiDAR.
Right.
So this technology is the same. Another connection with Mesoamerica up into North America is the production of the Chaco roads being identical to the causeway construction of the Mayans.
And we don't even know what those roads are for, right?
Yeah,
like
they didn't have the wheel.
Supposedly, right? Which I don't know. I still, every time I hear that, oh, these people didn't have the wheel, that seems kind of ridiculous to me. I think I've said this on this show before, but like any human being, you can be a dumb person, can see that something that's, for example, is like spherically shaped is going to roll and may provide you an advantage in trying to do something. So I just like don't really buy this idea that like some cultures never had the wheel. Like that's so silly to me. But the Chacoan roads, it's like, you have all of these roads that are perfectly straight, regardless of the natural features of the landscape. You can have a cliff in front of you and still that road is perfectly straight. Like, what is the purpose of that? And why is it built that way? And why does it need to be that precise? There's got to be a purpose behind all of that effort, but we don't know what it is.
Yeah, and apparently 3,000 years ago, North and South America was flourishing with millions of people, high culture. And it wasn't CO2, but it was natural climate variability that ended all of this. And that should be very telling and a warning for future humanity that this is a real possibility.
Yeah. And you kind of said this already, but like say for example, if you go visit Sankawi in New Mexico, one of the things is you start looking around, not just Sankawi, but that area, that whole area, you start realizing that there's cliff dwellings everywhere, like everywhere. There had to have been millions of people around, but yet we don't acknowledge that. That's not an acknowledged feature of the archaeological narrative. We just say, oh, there were, however many thousand people here, and completely dismiss the idea that it was heavily populated. But there's
Yeah.
really no reason to dismiss that.
We got to open our eyes. Archaeology is compartmentalized, and there's a bigger picture that we need to uncover. Be safe. We love you.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.